So, Christoph Fjellner, you are a conservative MEP from the European Parliament. So the Conservative Party is one of the few parties, actually, who's in favor of TTIP. But you're also Swedish. The Trade Commissioner Malmström, she is Swedish. She's pro-TTIP. And the business community in Sweden is pro-TTIP. Even the people are pro-TTIP. So there's a pro-TTIP Swedish bloc in Europe. So what did they understand what the rest of Europe didn't get?
Even Sweden, even the labor unions, the trade unions are actually in favor of TTIP. And I think in general what Sweden understands is the fact that globalization has benefited us and that free trade is good for the society and for everything we hold dear. And therefore I'm actually pretty surprised that Germany was probably the country in the world who's benefited the most from free trade. Self-proclaimed world champions of exports are so critical to TTIP.
But in Germany, the main concern might not be the free trade, but it's like changing the rules of how to decide things with regulatory bodies and stuff like that. So you have special courts for corporations. So isn't that something that concerns you as well?
Actually, what concerns me more right now, and I say TTIP as a response to, is that protectionism 2016 is not what protectionism was in the 50s or 60s. A politician today isn't protecting their market through tariffs, they're using regulation. So if one would like to get at modern protectionism, one actually has to address the question about regulation. And also, when our societies become increasingly complex, we regulate things to protect our citizens or protect the environment, but often we do it in a different way, which creates non-tariff barriers. So therefore, a modern trade policy has to address the questions about regulation. And therefore, I see that as not a new thing. Even the European Union, who actually is, with the internal market, a very advanced free trade agreement, gets at free trade through trying to get regulation in line with each other.
But then there are many critics who fear that if these regulatory bodies are, between the United States and the European Union, that it's more the lobbies who get access to them and not really the citizens' concerns or like parties' concerns. So doesn't this shift like democracy a little bit too far away from where the people are?
I would actually have a different view on that as well, mainly because I think if you read the mandate and read the text, it's very obvious that these regulatory bodies are only advisory bodies, and that the people that should advise us in how not to create unnecessary non-tariff barriers are the people that trade, that actually do the trading, that see these barriers and meet them. Is not that strange. So therefore, I think it's reasonable that the people, bird life is very important, Oxfam is important, but they're not experts in where you find new trade barriers. So that the people that find trade barriers are the ones that tell us. But at no point will any of these bodies have any power from me as a politician to decide whatever I want. So therefore, I'm not worried that I won't be able to stand up for my citizens and my democratic election because of regulatory cooperation.
Maybe one sentence to the special courts, which are currently debated. In Germany, there's a lot of criticism because many people say we just don't need them. We have sufficient rule of law systems in both parts of the world. So why do we need them?
I personally, I wouldn't be too comfortable challenging the governor in Mississippi if he's expropriated or breached a contract with me in a local court there, especially with their jury system. And I could actually understand that some US companies would be hesitant to actually be challenging the governments of certain EU member states. In our judicial systems, there are at least 2 EU member states that, according to Transparency International, is below Russia when it comes to judicial independence. So therefore, I think that to be able to have investment protection dealt with in a neutral area, somewhere where the government isn't controlling the rules by the laws or controlling the setting as we do in national courts is pretty reasonable. It's actually something that improves fundamental principles rather than threatens fundamental principles.
So if you say this, shouldn't then these courts also be for citizens as well, not only for companies?
If a citizen, let's start like this. If you do investment, you are able to gain from investment protection. And I think, of course, that if citizens do investment, citizens should also have investment protection. But to say that we should have a Swedish citizen should be able to challenge the Swedish government in some other system than the Swedish court system, I think that would be wrong, because we are both part of the same legal atmosphere. But if you're a foreign company or a foreign entity, then it might be an important thing to be able to be guaranteed your rights on a neutral ground. We have to remember that what investment protection is all about is actually it's not about what people try to claim with their myths and misconceptions. It is about you don't have the right to expropriate without paying compensation. You must honor the contracts you enter, and you can't discriminate. And those three fundamental principles are actually part of the fundamental law in the European Convention of Human Rights, and that we're able to guarantee that foreigners have that when they do investment, no matter if they're companies or individuals, I think is pretty important.
So now, during this week, there's negotiations are going forward. The main obstacle in these negotiations are obviously not the critics, but the negotiators themselves, because they don't come to terms. So do you really expect a TTIP agreement before the end of 2016? And if no, what is the main obstacle there?
I fully agree that I think a lot of the attentions has been put to to NGOs and critics rather than what's probably most important, what's going on in negotiations. And I think I'm very worried about the lack of progress in negotiations. I can clearly see the reason for this lack of negotiations. The US and the EU, we are elephants. We've all our negotiations, we've actually never had to compromise up until now. But if we want a good deal, both of us has to compromise, and we have to learn that very quickly. I really hope that we get an agreement before the end of the year. I think Obama needs it, because who knows who will come after Obama if we want an agreement with the US. But we need it as well, especially after the vote in Great Britain with Brexit. The European Union, we need an international success and strengthen the western part of the world and show that we're still to be counted with. And a failure of TTIP, which actually could be the consequence if we don't meet the end of this year, then it can become like the Doha round. The Doha round has been negotiated for years, but nobody expects it to deliver. And that's, I think, is the worst case scenario.
So you're pretty sure that if they don't come to terms by the end of the year, that this would mean actually a failure of the whole trade deal? I can't say that I'm sure it would mean a failure, but sometimes trade policy is a little bit like astrology. That when the stars are aligned and is right, then something can happen. But then something shifts, there is some national debate in specific countries, some upcoming election that complicates things. So there are these moments when it's possible to have fruitful trade negotiations. The thing that I worry about right now is the fact that throughout the world right now, the forces that don't want free trade, the forces that want nationalism, the forces that want to break up the European Union and separate the EU from the US are stronger than ever. They go from Marine Le Pen to Nigel Farage to Putin, and therefore, for them to have a success with killing TTIP would be devastating, I think.